Hi, I'm Dan Chambers, the founder of Chambers Law Firm. Thank you for joining me today on this video. We did a video about the types of murder in California. And on this video, I want to talk about the different types of manslaughter, which is a different form of homicide. They all go under the general umbrella of homicide. But manslaughters have a specific meaning under California law. The biggest difference between a murder and a manslaughter is what is called the concept of malice. And malice is present in murder charges. It's a legal term of art that is defined by the courts. But in manslaughter cases, there is an absence of malice. Malice is not required, and the prosecution doesn't have to show the element of malice. The other thing that's missing most of the time in a manslaughter case is an intent to kill, which is required for first and second degree murders. In California, there are three general types of manslaughter. The first and most common type is what is called voluntary manslaughter. A voluntary manslaughter is a killing that takes place in the heat of passion or under a sudden quarrel. The perfect example that you often see in the news is a case where a spouse comes home and finds perhaps their spouse with someone else. That person gets angry, takes out a gun, and shoots someone and ends up killing them. That's what's called a crime of passion. The killing happens under a sudden quarrel or a heat of passion situation, and it's a voluntary manslaughter because there's no intent to kill and there's what's called provocation. Something provoked the alleged killer to take the actions that they did. The second most common type of manslaughter is involuntary manslaughter. Now that's very different than a voluntary manslaughter. In an involuntary manslaughter, the killing is usually accidental and can be the result of negligence or carelessness on the part of the alleged killer in that situation. Here's a perfect example of that. It's called misdemeanor manslaughter. Let's say that two people are in a fight, and it starts out as a bar fight, but one of the people gains the upper hand and takes that person and starts banging their head on the curb just because they're angry with them, to the point where that person falls into a state of unconsciousness and ends up actually dying. In that situation, an involuntary manslaughter would be appropriate, or maybe even a voluntary if there's provocation. But the point is that by committing what they think is simply a battery, they're in a fight, if somebody ends up dying, that could be an involuntary manslaughter because they've done an unlawful act in a way that has caused the death of someone else. The other time that you might see a situation for an involuntary manslaughter, and it typically arises in a crossover of the third type I'll talk about in a moment, is if someone's driving a vehicle and due to some inattention they end up hitting a pedestrian. Certainly there was no intent to kill that person and it was purely accidental, but because they were careless in the way they were driving or operating some equipment, for example, they could be held responsible for that person's death under an involuntary manslaughter theory. Now the third most common type of manslaughter in California is a little bit complicated, and we'll talk about it in future videos and break it down a little bit. But it's called vehicular manslaughter. And as you might guess from the name, it's a killing that takes place and the defendant is in a vehicle and they do something that ends up killing someone else. In California, there are actually 5 different types of vehicular manslaughter. It's a complicated area of law, but think of it in a continuum. On the one end, you've got somebody that was merely negligent in their driving. The pedestrian situation I described would be a form of vehicular manslaughter, all the way up to a situation where someone is intoxicated, driving very fast, recklessly, hits somebody or gets in a traffic accident and ends up killing someone. If you watch the murder video, you know that under certain situations that could actually be a second degree, what we call Watson murder. But many times if the prosecution believes they can't prove that, they will allege a gross vehicular manslaughter with intoxication. So that's kind of at the other end of the spectrum. And in between there, you've got a lot of different varieties of vehicular manslaughter that you can encounter. But those are the general types, and in future videos, we'll break those down into more specific situations and talk about the possible punishments. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you have any questions, always feel free to call our office. We provide a free consultation, and we'll be happy to talk to you about your case. Thank you.